Why are there so many of you PC gamers purchasing this gaming PC? You may have noticed that right now it's ranked the #1 best seller at Best Buy. Do you think it's overrated, or do you think it's worthy of that spot? We're going to utilize our experience reviewing countless gaming PCs to help you decide if it's right for you in this 100% honest and unbiased review of the CyberPowerPC Gamer Supreme SLC 9000 BST. This configuration that we have here for you includes an AMD Ryzen 7 7800X 3D CPU and 4070 Super GPU. I'm going to quickly take you through the unboxing and what's included, gaming and creator benchmarks, design and build quality, the internals, thermals, fan noise, overall ease of use, pricing breakdowns and comparing its price to performance ratio against the competition, and my overall top likes and dislikes. If you decide against this PC after anything that I say in this video, just keep watching because I'm also going to be sharing with you some alternative PCs that I recommend for every budget. I'll include links down below for all the products that I mentioned. I guarantee that by the end of this video, you will know if this PC is right for you or not. But if you still have any questions after watching this entire video, just shoot me a comment, and if you're publicly subscribed, I guarantee a personal response. But first, let's rewind back into the past real quick and check out the unboxing. Included, as usual with CyberPowerPCs, we've got this very basic RGB gaming keyboard that's really not that fancy by any means, but still looks kind of cool in the dark. Except for this jacked up tab key right here. Must just be a rare defect because none of the others in the past have looked like this. I was actually pretty impressed with the quality of the included Elite M2 gaming mouse though. A really nice style overall and was pretty comfortable to game with. They also gave us a GPU power adapter, quick start guide, Wi-Fi antennas, and your typical really beefy power cable. Design-wise, this thing is clean. I actually really love this look. It's got a great balance of RGB and black and white throughout. Got a pretty bold diagonal strip here in the front with radiating lighting effects on both sides. A pretty unique style that I think they pulled off quite nicely. Unfortunately, it does block the bottom front intake fan though. We've got 3 intake fans total in the front, 3 exhaust fans as well, 2 at the top and 1 at the back. These 2 at the top are actually part of our all-in-one liquid cooling system, which for the newcomers out there is the most important critical thing in keeping your CPU cool. This cooling block right here uses a liquid to take the heat from the CPU and transfers it up through these tubes up into this 240mm radiator where the heat is spread out and then blown out the top. To the right of our CPU, we've got 2 16GB sticks of 6000 MHz T-Force Delta DDR5 RAM for a total of 32GB. Underneath the CPU is our 2TB SSD. This one that they gave us is an AData Legend 800 Gold. Nothing too special about the speeds with this one as it tested at only 3.6 megabytes per second read and 2.9 write. Then underneath that, the most valuable and most expensive part of this PC by far, our MSI Geforce RTX 4070 Super GPU. Really kind of crazy how much smaller this is than a 4080 Super. Unfortunately, after removing the GPU, you can see that we've only got 1 more additional SSD slot. I guess you kind of get what you pay for, as this is one of the cheaper motherboards. The one in this build is a Gigabyte B650MC V2. Underneath the GPU though, we do have 2 extra full-sized PCIe slots for any expansion cards that you may want to add in the future. And then swinging around to the back, we've only got 1 bay for an additional 3.5-inch mechanical hard drive. Usually we have at least 2. We also usually have 2 2.5-inch SSD slots back here as well. Only 1 more option for 1 more hard drive in this PC. And then last but not least, in the bottom right, are a Pivia 850 watt power supply, which is one of the more cheaper brands. It's not always an issue, but one of the more common problems that I've seen some other people have with their CyberPowerPCs is a cheap power supply that just dies on them after a few years. Not really a huge deal though, as replacing it with a high quality one will only run you about $100 later down the road. For the ports on the top, we've got a USB Type-C, 2 USB-As, a headphone jack, LED button for changing the RGB animations, and your power button. On the back, an HDMI and display port directly connected to the motherboard for use when your GPU isn't working properly, a PS2 port for older keyboards and mice, 4 more USB-As, connectors for your Wi-Fi antennas, a USB Type-C, and again 4 more USB-As, an Ethernet jack, micro microphone line out and line in. Then on the back of your 4070 Super GPU, 1 HDMI and 3 display ports. Now for the software, we've got the Gigabyte Control Center for customizing your RGB, and for overclocking and tweaking the performance, the AMD Ryzen Master. Unfortunately, a lot of these parameters require a restart. For those of you that want further control, the BIOS has plenty in here that you can fine tune as well if you're into overclocking and want to squeeze every last drop of performance out of your PC. Now when it came to the fan noise, these are my results after testing each of the main fan profiles. In quiet mode, it was just a little over 42.5 decibels. And then during gameplay, it brought the fan noise up to a little over 43 decibels. And you can see here in this chart that it's about average compared to the others. For the thermals, you can see in our thermal imaging time-lapse from computer off to full-on gaming that we do get some heat built up on the glass right next to the GPU as well as on the radiator above the CPU. We're also getting a pretty hot SSD underneath the CPU. Again, I do feel somewhat cheated not getting a heatsink on the SSD like they showed in the Best Buy pictures. The large majority of my thermal testing was spent in actual gameplay though. These were our CPU temps for several different games at 1080p. And you can see here that compared to some of the other similar spec pre-builts, the temperatures are a little bit above average. And then averaging all of that 1080p gaming temperatures data together and comparing with the last 35 PCs, this gives us an even better overall perspective on how this stacks up against the competition. This only confirmed it to be hotter than the other similar spec PCs and actually hotter than quite a few PCs that were also a lot more powerful. Then jumping into 4K gaming, we actually organized this chart by the GPU because high resolution gaming puts a lot more pressure on the GPU and less on the CPU. Here you can see that the GPU did get pretty hot, especially when you compare it to these other top tier PCs with GPUs that push a lot more power, which generates a lot more heat. But those more expensive PCs also come with better cooling capabilities. All right, now for the performance and gaming benchmarks. And up next, the most important part of this review, the price to performance ratios. For Cinebench R23, which simulates its 3D rendering power, we got a multi-core score of 18,016 and a single core score of 1808. By the way, pretty much all rendering software can utilize multiple cores, so that's the most important score here, and this unfortunately is not that impressive. When cross-referencing this with the other PCs that I've tested that also have 7800X 3D CPUs, this only confirms that Ryzen is not a good CPU option for 3D rendering. And another very helpful test for you 3D renderers is the V-Ray benchmark. And these were our CUDA, RTX, and overall V-Ray performance scores. Now the GPU rendering scores were actually pretty impressive here. This is an important score if you're doing a lot of high polygon 3D modeling or real-time viewport rendering and lighting. The overall V-Ray performance score though is a CPU-based rendering test that demonstrates how well a PC can handle the more advanced realistic rendering that takes a lot longer to calculate. And this V-Ray performance chart confirmed that yet again this CPU in this pre-built is not performing well compared to the competition in the same pricing category. And unfortunately for those of you who use Blender, we got low scores for both the CPU and GPU rendering tests. And the last set of benchmarks for creatives before we get into gaming are the Puget Benchmarks. For DaVinci Resolve we got 2517, and compared to the others, this is about where I'd expect it to be with these specs. Adobe Premiere 11,865, pretty decent here as well. I'd say that this PC is a pretty good option if you're on a budget and you need a PC for editing. In Photoshop, we got 9898, which is actually one of the highest. If you typically have massive Photoshop projects with a ridiculous amount of layers, I can confidently say that this PC won't have any issues with it. For 3D Mark, which is a great benchmark used to predict a computer's overall gameability, we plugged in these overall graphic and CPU scores into our master chart, and you can see here that it ranked pretty decent overall, but actual gaming benchmarks are probably what you guys care the most about though. These are a few clips from the gameplay on some of those games. We took the many hours of testing from those games and averaged the FPS against the competition, and here you can see that it did fairly well compared to other similar spec gaming pre-builts. We then averaged all of those gaming FPS together to give us an even broader overall perspective on how this gaming PC compared to the rest, and I'd say that 240 average FPS at the highest graphic presets is pretty awesome for a more budget-friendly gaming PC. Then in our 1440p tests, you can expect about a 27% drop in FPS. Our average here was about 179 FPS overall, and that's quite a bit higher than the other similar spec PCs below it. And then checking out the FPS for each individual game at this resolution, you can see that the only game that we did not break at least 100 is Cyberpunk. And in 4K, our average FPS dropped an additional 45% with an average of 99 FPS. And then breaking it down game by game reveals how big big of a difference a 4070 Ti versus a 4070 Super does at higher resolutions. Still above 60 FPS with Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, but only 36 with Cyberpunk. So you might want to pull the graphic settings down for that one if you need 4K. Now for the most important part, the price to performance ratios. Right now at the time of this recording, this PC will cost you $1,700. This is a great deal for a PC with these specs, and as you can see here, we've got a new chart topper with the best 1080p gaming price to performance ratio out of all the PCs that I've ever reviewed. Even better than that iBuyPower Y40 that we just reviewed. Woohoo! That's gonna take a long time to clean up. Probably should have just had my editor do that with visual effects. Even jumping up to 1440p gaming, it still held its place in first by quite a bit. But because this struggled to perform well at 4K, it fell to 5th place at that resolution. And because of the current deals going on with the Alienware Aurora R16 and its high performance, both configurations that I tested are still holding the first and second spots here for the best dollar per FPS ratio at 4K. Now, if you're at an entirely different price point, these are my recommendations for every budget. I'll include links down below for all the computers that I mentioned. If this $1,700 PC that I reviewed today is too much and you need to be closer to $1,000, then I would go at this CyberPowerPC Gamer Extreme with an i5 and 4060. If $1,000 is still too much, then I would go with this exact version of the Victus by HP 15L that I reviewed with a 1660 Super and i5 for just over $600. That's the bare minimum that I would recommend for semi-decent graphic settings. If you're coming from a console like an Xbox Series X or a PS5 and you want your graphics to at least match that, then you'll need a PC with at least a 3060, or in this case a 4060 GPU, which then you'll need to bump up the power supply to 500 watts and also bump up your RAM to 16 gigabytes, which brings the price of this one up to over $800. If you can actually afford more than this PC, then I would go with this configuration of the CyberPowerPC Gamer Supreme with an i7 and 4080 Super for $2,270. Basically the same specs as the less expensive version of the i7 500 that we tested, but a lot cheaper. Although I prefer the Corsair version, this one is not a bad option if you can't afford Corsairs. Just know that the quality isn't as good as Corsairs, which also come with a 2-year warranty versus the typical 1 year. Above that, at just over $3,200, the Alienware Aurora R16 is actually a pretty good deal. I would get this one if and only if you don't plan to be doing any upgrading to next-gen components. Proprietary Alienware PCs are only really for those that find modding their PC to be a chore and typically just toss their PCs for a brand new one every few years. And if you're an absolute baller, your best bet for quality, performance, longevity, and upgradability, the Corsair Vengeance i7 500. This one has been the most purchased top-tier PC by my viewers. Third most purchased overall when you compare with more affordable PCs. Overall, this is currently one of the best deals, if not the best, for a pre-built PC with these specs. It doesn't have the best motherboard or best power supply or best SSD, but you can't ask a lot for that price. If you're gonna push this PC hard for several hours every day, then I predict that power supply to only last you a few years. But again, not a huge deal to replace it with a higher quality one for only about $100 later down the road. Most likely in 2 years, you're gonna get the itch to upgrade parts anyways. If you do decide to purchase this PC or any of the others that I mentioned, then please remember to use my affiliate links in the comments and description below, as I get a small commission at no cost to you for every single purchase made. And it's actually a major factor in keeping this channel going and getting better and better for you. I've also upgraded to Genius links, so each link below provides you with all the major outlets to purchase each PC so that you can compare for the best pricing. I'd also like to personally thank all of my members for their monthly support of this channel. Also make sure to like, comment, and subscribe with notifications turned on to stay up to date with all of my latest tech and 100% honest and unbiased PC reviews. Thanks for watching, guys. I love you guys. God bless.